Hello all. Here is a pen tool demonstration. I'm going to use a scan of a handprint as a template, and then I'll trace around it using the Illustrator pen tool, and then I'll place it in an oval. My objective is to get two sets of paths, one around the perimeter of the oval and then one around the perimeter of the hand. You should recognize these little blue squares as anchor points. My other objective is to fill the logo with a red. I'm going to create a layer for the scan of the hand that I will use as a template to trace around. Here's the layer dialog box, and you can see that I've created a layer 2 here. I can turn the visibility of that off, and I've locked it. That way I can be sure that I'm not moving it as I trace around it with the pen tool. I don't mean to confuse you with the idea of layers in Illustrator, but it's something that exists in both Illustrator, Photoshop, and InDesign, and you will be able to use layers by the end of the class. The next thing I'm going to do is use the tool, Dialog Box. This should be familiar to you. It might be a little bit different on your desktop, depending on what tools you've used or how you've edited this. But you'll note that here's the pen tool that I'm going to be using to trace around the handprint. So let's take a look at some of these tools. When you double click on the pen tool, you'll see that you have these other options to add anchor points, delete anchor points, or to use the anchor point tool. So what does that mean? I'm going to begin to trace around this handprint using the pen tool. Now this is just one way of doing it. Notice when I start with an anchor point, and then let's say I notice a slight arc in this finger here, so I'm going to click it here, click, hold, and I'm using a mouse by the way, until I get that little arc there, and then I'm going to loop it around the top there, drag out on the control points here, and then come down to about where it was, that other anchor point that I drew, and so forth. Now I'm not going to be very careful. I'm going to come back and adjust it. So I won't bore you with all those steps. I'll do maybe a finger or two more, and then I'll cut to where I've completed the outline of the handprint, and I am now going, after that, I'm going to refine it. I wanted to point out a few other things too. I wanted you to note that while I work on the outline, that I have not selected a fill, and I have not selected a stroke. If I had white as a fill in here, it would obscure the pink template that I'm using and probably distract me from completing the perimeter. Okay, so I finished the perimeter here of the hand. Here's what the hand looks like in its rough form. I'm going to leave the pen tool for a little bit. I wanted to point out a few things. The square boxes represent the anchor points, and then the dots are handles. Now these are control points, sometimes they're called. I'm going to leave the pen tool. I'm going to go to the direct select tool. This will allow me to move things around, or the selection tool, excuse me. So here, let's say I wanted to slide the anchor point over to make that a little better of a tracing of the fingers. And I'm using the direct select tool for this. So you can toggle back and forth between the select and the direct select tool to see what you get. And I'm editing or changing both the control points. I have a choice here. I can drag them out. You can see how that changes the curve. And it tends to want to sort of jump to that template that I scanned and placed on that layer, which is nice. It's almost intuitive. Here, for example, I might want to insert another anchor point here. Easy to do. All you need to do is go to your pen tool, add anchor point, I'm going to put an anchor point right there, go back to the direct select tool, move that down to the bottom between those two fingers there, and then make some adjustments with my handles. So it takes a little bit of time to adjust your paths, and I'm going to cut to the refined silhouette of the hand. These vectors are called Bézier curves, and they're named after Pierre Bézier, who was an engineer designer for Renault in France. And when auto body design became a thing for computers in computer-assisted design, Pierre Bézier was important in establishing mathematical, models or way of describing the surfaces of cars. So what you're doing when you're drawing these curves is actually making what are called quadratic equations. And I won't, it's amazing to me that it's invisible to us, but these vectors are actually very complex mathematical equations. Now that you know that each one of these arcs can be described mathematically, you'll want to keep them to a minimum. That will cut down their file size, and I think it's pretty clear why that would be. The fewer curves that need to be described mathematically, the shorter or the smaller your file size will be. Next, I'll draw the oval, and that should be fairly simple compared to the hand. And again, I want to try to describe it in as few arcs as possible. So here is the completed oval. I'm going to use the print color space because these are going to be brochures and they're going to be printed. You're going to need to use the cyan, magenta, yellow, and K space as the fill. And so here's what that looks like. Okay, so I've opened up my layers dialog box briefly, and you'll note that there's two paths. There's one for the hand and one for the red oval. What I'm going to do next is select both of them. I want to make sure that the hand path, which is going to be white or clear or transparent, is on top of the red oval. And then this will be off screen, but then what I want to do is go up under Object, and I'm going to make a compound path. Now, have you ever wondered about letters like lowercase e? They have an I in the top part of them, top bowl, and that is how they're made. So that letter forms like E or O, for example, can be transparent and they can float over any kind of background. So as we segue into Photoshop, you'll learn how to save your files in the proper file formats. For our purposes here, I'll end it here by saving it as a PDF, or you can keep it in its native Illustrator. EPS is not a bad file format either. It supports vectors.